What's up guys, we're Deep Roots Disc Golf and we're back today with the second round of our best overstable mid-range bracket. Let's dive into it. Thanks again to our partners over at Bangin Chainz for making this series possible. If you haven't checked out the first video, make sure to do that before you watch this one. We've got a really awesome group of 8 of the best overstable mid-ranges out on the market. I think today's winner is going to surprise you, but let's check out the bracket first. We began day 1 with 16 of some of the most popular overstable mid-ranges on the market. We pinned 8 discs head-to-head, March Madness style, and on day 1, the Malta and the Raw emerged victorious. So now we're on to day 2. From the Innova Cayman to the Dynamic Justice, we have 8 mid-ranges with varying intensities of overstability. So let's talk overstable mid-range eligibility. We've excluded all putt and approach discs. That means no harps, no zones, or A3s, and in order to be on this list, the manufacturer needs to specify this disc as a mid-range on the disc. Now for bracket seeding. We used the best overstable mid-range list from Disc Golf Now to seed as many of the discs that we had from that list. I'll link to that article in the description down below. For the remaining mid-ranges, we randomly assign them by pulling their name out of a hat. Before we jump into it, consider supporting the channel and Disc Golf by hitting that subscribe button, and make sure to leave a comment down below letting us know which disc you would move on to the Final Four from this group. Alright, on to day 2. Alright, so for the first matchup on day 2, we have the 2 seed, the Dynamic Disc Truth Infusion Plastic, versus...
we have the Warrior from Gateway Disc Sports and the Diamond Plastic.
Alright, so for those of you guys that don't know, the Truth is a 5-speed. It honestly feels very similar to the Rock 3 that we were throwing yesterday, plastic included. Has a tiny little bead on there. Again, very similar to the Rock 3.
Warrior also has a small bead on it, pretty slim profile. This thing was pretty overstable and flying, and I do like the Diamond Plastic. It's a pretty good feeling plastic.
So thoughts on the Truth. The Truth is one of those discs that you can flip up to flat. It will hold it, but it will also maintain a straight flight afterwards. I compare it to a little bit more stable of a buzz for what I throw normally, but it would fade left less consistently to me than some of the other discs that we threw today.
Definitely less of a hard fade for the Truth, a little bit more neutral. Great disc to throw though. The Warrior, on the other hand, was definitely one of the more overstable mids that still had a decent amount of glide, in my opinion. This thing you could depend on to come back left, throwing right-hand backhand. You guys can argue with me if you disagree. It didn't seem to have quite as much glide as some of the other ones. But yeah, good disc, definitely overstable.
I remember having big skips with the Warrior because of the hardness of the plastic. I also remember the Truth being one of the farther flyers included in there with the Rock and the M2 and the Wasp because of how straight they would fly. When I think about what I'm looking for in a
overstable mid-range, I think of 3 things.
I'm looking for a consistent flight, not a meat hook. I don't have a huge arm. I have a meat hook and a tilt and a Raptor that I can hardly throw. So for me, I'm looking for something that will flip up to flat, but always finish left for me. The second thing I'm looking for is that hand feel. I actually don't mind a little bit of a bead on a mid-range.
Really?
I know. I think a bead throws me off for putting, for like the soft release, but when I can do a power grip, I kind of like that bead in my little fat Tersus fingers. And the third thing I'm looking for is glide. I have a zone for the short overstable throws. I need something that's going to go somewhere between 30 to 50 feet longer, and I find that the overstable mid-range is the disc for me. With those 3 things in mind, I like the Truth for this matchup.
Yeah, I think I have to go Truth by a narrow margin. I enjoyed this disc, but I remember the Truth being one of the discs that was really enjoyable to throw. A little bit more of a flip similar to the Rock from day 1, but yeah, great disc, and I guess Truth moves on.
Truth moves on.
All right, next matchup we've got coming in is the Axiom Pyro. This is the 7 seed in our matchups.
Versus the 10 seed, the Innova, Gator, and G-Star Plastic.
Yeah, so we've got a couple Pyros here. These are in the Prism Proton Plastic. Honestly, these things are super sweet. They're gyro, but the way that they put this together with the 2 different molds, they look really cool. I'm a little biased too, because this is actually mine that I picked up at Bangin Chainz a while back. These things have almost no bead, good feel in the hand, and a relatively flat on top.
The Gator is beaded. This thing is really flexy, obviously with the G-Star plastic. To me, this has like average glide. I did actually really enjoy throwing the Gator today. It's one of those discs that you can flip up to flat for a small, short period of time, and then it will kind of fade left relatively hard. It's definitely more overstable than the Rock 3, but if I had to choose between this and Rock 3, I would go Rock 3. This was my second favorite Innova disc that we threw. When I compare it to the Pyro was one of my favorite discs that I had not thrown before. I think it feels very similar to both a Malta, the Rock 3. It can flip up to flat on an absolute crush, but it's really gonna be one of those discs that pushes forward on a hyzer line. Just pushes forward with that glide.
Yeah, for me, I like the Gator. The G-Star plastic's not my favorite. I felt like it had a touch less glide than the Pyro. And I think that the Malta is a fair comparison for this Pyro. I felt like they were very similar. But it's a very workable mid, hard to turn over, at least for someone with a noodle arm, which means that if I put it on an anhyzer, it would definitely fight out, which I feel like makes it a very workable, overstable mid. And yeah, I just feel like something about gyro, I don't know. It gives me like I feel like I always get a clean release with an MVP disc. You know what you're going?
Yeah, I'm gonna push the Pyro through.
I'm going Pyro as well, 2 Pyros. All right, our next matchup, we've got a couple dynamic discs. We have the 3 seed, which is the Dynamic Discs Justice. We have it in the Lucid plastic here versus
the 14 seed, which is the Dynamic Discs Verdict in the Lucid X Team Series Chris Clement plastic. Dynamic disc.
That's a
naming.
mouthful right there.
So some thoughts on the Verdict. This was one of the more overstable discs that we threw yesterday. It's really pop top, which you think would get it a lot of glide, but it really doesn't glide a ton. Dylan likes to rip on this with a forehand. This is one of his go-to forehand mid-ranges. So you know it can withstand a lot of that torque that a forehand generally generates. For me, it's a little too meat hooky for my noodle arm backhand. So wasn't one of my favorite discs today.
Just to add on to that, I like that disc a lot for forehand. Definitely overstable enough to handle some of the torque that comes on a forehand or tendency to roll over the wrist, which I think is, that happens for some of us. The Justice, on the other hand, this is an interesting disc. Also very meat hooky, very overstable. You can see on here it says that it has a glide of 1, and it was true to form on that. This thing really wanted to get to the ground quickly, which made it somewhat unique in terms of the discs that we threw. Honestly, I really enjoyed this disc. I'm not sure if it's my go-to everyday overstable mid though. Really nice on the forehand. Dylan threw a 6 shot with it, parked one of the holes that we played. But yeah, it gets to ground really fast. It's almost a utility disc in a way, which is interesting. It's a 3 seed. On a lot of lists that we looked at, this was a super popular overstable mid. Yeah, great disc, reliable fade, just not quite as much glide as some of the others that we threw.
I don't really forehand a lot of my mid-ranges. I just don't have that skill set yet. So for me, I'm thinking about these discs from a backhand perspective. My personal preference was I enjoyed throwing the Justice more. I felt like I could have more consistent throws with it, especially when we are on hole 12 and 13 on the back, throwing more hyzer bombs. So for that reason, I'm going to vote the Justice. I think these are super comparable discs though.
I feel like, just picking this up again, I feel like I'm gonna have to disagree and go Verdict just because, and it wasn't because I disliked the Justice at all. I just feel like this is more of a true to form mid-range like disc that I would throw more often. The Justice I could see myself using in a lot of utility scenarios or for very specific shots that I needed to get to the ground quickly. But I feel like the Verdict is a better mid-range that I would throw more often.
If you look, they're very similar. The Justice may be a little deeper. Look at the top. The Verdict is definitely more pop top. So for me, you know, going over my criteria, being able to forehand it, glide, skip. Obviously this Justice has a great skip, but looking at these two, I think we got to look at versatility. The Justice is a very niche disc in my opinion. It has a certain shot that you can use it for. It's going to be more for those touch shots, but this Verdict could be an all-around disc, you know, a forehand on some right dog legs or a backhand on some left dog legs. This one can be used for a lot. So with that versatility, I'm going verdict.
For our last matchup of round 1 on day 2 here, we have the Kaste Kaxe Z in the K1 plastic
versus the Innova Cayman in the Champ plastic. So the Cayman is a 5.5 speed Walmart disc. So what I mean by that is if you look at this thing, and hopefully the camera will focus on it, you can see like bubbles and stuff like in this side of the plastic. It's not what I'm used to when I look at a Champ disc. Dylan and Eric have assured me that this Champ plastic is different than what they've experienced as well.
Well, my Manta's Champ. Does that feel like
it feels
my Manta?
Nothing like your Manta, I will be honest.
Yeah.
So yeah, I'm gonna chalk this disc up to being made by Whammo. You know, the Walmart-esque brand that makes frisbees, because that's how my experience with it was today. One of the things I do not like about this disc is the rim. It's a super thick rim for a mid-range. It's like almost like pig-esque range, and I really was not a fan of the pig when we tried it for the perfect putt.
Feels like an approach disc for sure.
Really
like
does.
in the A3 zone, but like not as good.
I don't know if I like believe the 5.5 speed. Like if you're telling me that this disc is faster than some of the other ones that we threw today with this, you know, thick and bullnosy of a rim, I don't know if I believe that.
All right, well, that was subtle.
Did you enjoy it?
No, I didn't like it either.
Okay.
On the opposite end of the spectrum, I felt like the Kaxe Z here was one of the more enjoyable discs to throw on the whole group of 16. First off, we mentioned this in our Kaste video, but the K1 plastic is like butter. Like, this is some of the best plastic on the market, just in terms of feel. Like, I don't know, it has grip, but it doesn't feel sticky. It feels like it would be super durable. It's got a little bit of like tackiness and like, I don't know. Yeah, I know you love it too. It's a great plastic. This thing has tons of glide. Probably not the most overstable disc in the overstable mid-range category,
but reliably would not turn over and hold that line.
I would agree with that. Yeah. Yeah, we didn't turn it over at all, and this thing had some distance on it. It was up there with like Pyro, Malta, Rock had some good distance. I mean, this thing was getting some great distance on it. And they call this a 6-speed, and they use the phrase mid-range driver. Yeah. So this thing definitely has the ability to bomb for a mid-range. Yeah, I mean, I have nothing but good things to say about the Kaxe.
To me, it's not a competition here. I'm gonna vote Kaxe.
I'm gonna vote Kaxe. Dylan, what would you have voted?
I would have voted Kaxe.
Okay, all right.
That's 3 Kaxes. On to the next round.
All right, so we're here with the second round on day 2. We got the 2 seed, the EMAC Truth,
versus the Axiom, Pyro, and the Prism Proton plastic. Another one of those long name plastics. So gyro. I think gyro is awesome. I'm a believer that it does get more RPM and distance as a result of that. The Pyro, for me, was one of the few of the discs that I could actually forehand.
I think similarly to the Verdict, Justice, and Deflector, the stability of the disc mitigated the impact of my dirty forehand releases, protecting the disc from turning and burning.
Dylan, I mean, you haven't talked about the Pyro yet. What are your thoughts on it?
So for me, I struggle with gyro a lot. I don't know if it's my hands.
Just have a narrower nose. Maybe it's a little more touchy on the angle.
Yeah, I don't know. I struggle with it. But I kept throwing it nose up. And I've done that with other MVP discs. I've done that with other Axiom discs. I struggle in general throwing it nose up, but for some reason with the gyro, it's a little over exaggerated.
I mean, if you compare noses there, this one is definitely a little bit more bull nose. This one a little bit more sharper.
Yeah.
Could definitely see that.
So the sharpness may have something to do with it.
Truth is your go-to overstable mid-range, right?
Well, I have the Truth and then I have the Verdict, so they kind of fill different slots. This is my most useful mid-range.
Do you throw backhand more or forehand?
I do throw this backhand more. I use the Verdict mainly for forehand shots. I use the Truth mainly for my backhand mid-range shots. So it definitely has a slot in my bag. Just like we've talked about with the Rock 3, the Malta, you know, this one is one of the best in my opinion. If you ask anyone online, I know you guys will comment about it, but the Truth, you know, the EMAC Truth, everyone loves it. and I will agree with everyone on that.
I will say before we choose that I think that this is one of the harder matchups, but because it's bracket style, we have to pick one.
It's cutthroat.
I am going to go with the Pyro.
I'm going truth.
Eric for the tiebreak.
I will go ahead and echo what they said about this being a tougher matchup. I really love both of these discs. Could see myself bagging both of them, but I will say that I currently bag this. It's relatively new in my bag. I've only had it there for about 2 weeks now. To me, I love gyro, the way that it feels, and I feel like I do get some extra distance off of it. And this thing, to me, is just more reliably overstable than this truth is. This is a great disc, but the Axiom Pyro really did it for me, so I'm moving that one on.
Quick aside, I do think that if the truth was yesterday, it would have moved into the Final Four.
Also, I feel like everyone in the comments will probably agree with you. So.
All right, so back to the 6th seed, the Kaxe versus
14 seed Dynamic Verdict.
So the Kaxe was one of my favorite discs that we threw in this whole challenge. We had tried it out in a previous video, and it really was shocking. Garrick mentioned the plastic is incredible. This is one of those discs that I feel like I'm missing in my bag. If you throw a Malta, you know that it's gonna fade a little bit harder. So I compare this more so to the Wasp, maybe like a brand new Wasp with a little bit more glide. The Wasp that I have, because its Jawbreaker beats in a ton, I would love to put this thing in my bag as
The longer distance, overstable mid-range, maybe like 300 plus feet, versus the more overstable Malta, maybe 275 to 300.
But yeah, that's my thoughts on the Kaxe. Love this disc.
So you guys already know I love my verdicts. This one's in my bag right now. Like I said, I have a prime verdict in my bag. This is my go-to forehand mid-range. I can torque on this thing, I can throw it, and it's still gonna come back for me. Good for those right dog leg shots in the woods. It's got a decent skip. It gets me a little extra distance, so
It's really hard to find.
this one is pretty hard to find.
People really wanted us to try Kaxe, and I'm not gonna lie, like I was incredibly skeptical. We tried the Recco, we tried the Berg, we tried the Kaxe, and the Kaxe was my favorite disc out of that bunch. I think the Kaxe is a standalone. Again, I don't think I have this in my bag today, and I would love to put this in my bag. For that reason, I'm going Kaxe.
That's a good disc, man.
Thinking about the Kaxe, and you guys knowing how I play mainly forehand, and the Kaxe just turns over a little too much for me, just because of, you know, I got a big arm. And so for that reason, I gotta stick with my verdict, because I know it's coming back.
Eric with another tiebreak.
Wow.
All right, here we are again, another Eric tiebreak. I feel like we have to reiterate that this is bracket style. We would probably pick different discs if, you know, we were picking out of that box and picking the 4 that we liked the best. We'd have to look at the individual matchup. So, in this individual matchup, I feel like we do have somewhat of a contrast here. This one, slightly less overstable, tons of glide. This one, more overstable, can definitely be torqued on and relied on to come back. Again, loved both these discs. I think that the verdict is great. I think that I could see myself bagging it for forehand because I don't really have a mid-range that I love forehanding. I think what does it for me is that in our cast class video, when you were torquing on this thing and throwing it really hard, flat, it's very resistant to turn. It's weird. It's like you can get it to flip, but it doesn't really turn over. And so I would say that it is very reliably overstable, like not as much of a meat hook, but definitely pushes, glides, gives you a ton of extra distance. And I think that makes it very unique. Like it's kind of hard to put your finger on just on exactly what it is, but this disc is very unique and unlike things I've thrown. So I'm sorry to all the dynamic people out there. I really do like all of these mids. I thought they were 3 good discs. Now that I've eliminated 3 of them. Going with Kaxe.
There it is. The 6th seed Kaxe and the 7th seed Axiom Pyro are soaring into the Final Four as the top contenders from day 2. Make sure to come back Monday to see which of these discs becomes the best overstable mid-range. We're Deeper's Disc Golf. Thanks for watching. We'll see you in the next one.
We're back today with the 2nd round of the best overstable mid-range. Today with the second round